Hey everyone, welcome to my June reading wrap up. So these videos have often been quite long for me. I'm going to go over stats and then books that I've read this month. However, if I had a book in a reading vlog, I'm going to tell you what the reading vlog was, and all I'm going to show you is the book, and I'm going to tell you what I rated it. That is the only way I'm going to be able to keep this as short as possible. So I will put a list of the genre breakdown for the month for me here. I read 24 books. That equaled 8,430 pages. 23 of those were physical, one I read on my Kindle, and my average rating on the month was 3.75. So let me get started with two books that I didn't rate because they were nonfictions that I read this month. I don't rate nonfiction books. The first was Michael Bolton's The Soul of It All, which was the first memoir he's written. I don't know if he's had any others come out, but my aunt had this and I love Michael Bolton and she asked if I wanted to borrow it. I said, of course. So I read this. It just talks about his life and the struggles he had growing up and becoming who he is now. It's a memoir, but he did say it was his first memoir. So again, not sure if he has another one out yet. And the other nonfiction I read was Blitzed by Norman Ohler. And this is about drugs and the Nazi regime. And this was actually very fascinating because I didn't realize how many of like the common drugs and like the drugs that we deal with still today came out of Germany around the time of World War II and Hitler's reign there. So fascinating. It was also fascinating to hear about how they related drug use and obviously anti-Semitism at that time. It was disturbing, but interesting because it's not something I've heard about regarding World War II. Okay, now I'm going to go in the order that I read the books for the month. I started the month off with Lucy Score's Finally Mine, which is the second book in her Benevolence trilogy. I did not have this in a reading vlog, so this one's about Aldo and Gloria. Aldo is the best friend of the guy from the first book, and Gloria was the girl that was saved by our female lead from the first book from being abused by her, at that time, boyfriend. So they do have a pretty close connection. Aldo is also in the National Guard, and there's an incident in the first book that involved him directly, and this is kind of him dealing with it as well as his love story with Gloria. I didn't love this one as much as the first one, and then I'll eventually talk about the third one, but I think that was because we got a lot of their story in the first book. Like there was a lot of overlap between the timelines on both of these books, and I knew they were obviously going to be a couple that was talked about because they were together in the first book, so I think that's kind of what put me off to it a little bit. There wasn't much of a surprise or things that I wasn't expecting for their relationship. I gave this a 3.75 and 2 on Spice. And now I'm going to talk about the books real quick that I read in the, I think it was just like a realistic reading week with work for me. I started that off with The Deal by Elle Kennedy, finished this off in that vlog, and I gave this a 4.5 and a 2.5 on Spice. Then I read The Lost Book of Eleanor Dare. This was a 3.5 and a half Spice. Then I read Renegades by Marissa Meyer, which is the first book in the Renegades trilogy. I gave this a 3.75 and 0 on Spice. And the last book from that vlog was Beach Read by Emily Henry. That was my sister's book. I don't have it anymore. I gave that a 4.5 and a 1.5 on the Spice. All right, the next 3 books, I think. Yes, the next few books, I think, were all not in a vlog. So we have about 5 to go through that I did not vlog about. The first was Raiders of the Lost Heart by Joe Segura. This is a like spoof rom-com of Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones movie, and they are both, I wanted to say paleontologists, archaeologists, and they're on a dig together. They knew each other, these two characters knew each other when they were younger. We have Corey and Ford, and it just really is about them trying to go on this dig together, and there's like obviously secrets that Ford is keeping from Corey that she finds out about, and secrets just concerning the dig in general, but they also have this like unrelenting attraction to each other, so they're trying to keep that a secret because they hate each other. But at the same time, they're just like super attracted to each other. So it's just like a typical rom-com. It was cute. I gave this 3 stars and 2 on Spice. Then I read The Atlas Complex by Olivia Blake. This is the final book in the Atlas 6 trilogy. The overall story was good. I liked how it wrapped up the story from the previous 2 books. However, at times I felt like this was really chaotic and it was a bit long. I don't feel like it needed to be as long as it was. And again, I've said this with Olivia Blake's writing, especially for the Atlas 6. I just have to think a lot when I read her books because it's written like she wants it to be very intelligently written, and that's fine at times, but sometimes I'm like, it's overkill. So that's kind of how I felt. This was probably my least favorite out of the trilogy. I did like seeing the storylines of the characters we've been following for the first 2 books wrapped up in this. I'm happy that I'm done with this trilogy. I didn't hate it, but it's definitely not going to be one that sits at the top of my list. But it was interesting. It was different. Very dark academia with a fantasy twist. I enjoyed it. So I gave this a 3.25 and half on spice. Then I read None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. This was the book club pick of the month for a book club I'm in. And this was my third Lisa Jewell. And this is probably going to be my last Lisa Jewell. It's not that her writing is bad or her stories are bad, but in general, I just feel icky after I'm done reading her books. There's just something about the content in them that makes me uncomfortable. And I was actually watching another video, someone picking their July TBR, and they picked this book and they said the same thing. So I know it's not just me, which made me feel good. All of the books I've read by her have given me like a weird feeling at the end and I don't like it. So I don't think I'm gonna read any more of hers. This had similar vibes to that movie that I can't think of the name of it right now, but it was Blake Lively and Anna Kendrick were in it. Something Lie, I want to say, was in the title. It had the same kind of vibe as that, except this had like a podcast subplot in it, but it was unreliable narrator. You don't really know what's going on. You think you have an idea about these women's lives, but actually it's all turned upside down. And I kind of knew how it was going to end. So it didn't really surprise me. I did end up giving this a 3.5. This was probably the best one I read of her books, but still not my favorite kind of a read. Then I read Heather Fawcett's Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, which is the first book in the Emily Wilde's, as of now, is a trilogy. The third book's not out yet. And this was adorable. This was fun. This was a great like summer fantasy because it wasn't heavy. It was very light, not very high stakes, cute little romance, just a fun story about fairies. And I did enjoy this. I'm looking forward to reading The Map of the Otherlands. I do have that. I will probably be reading that in the fall. But this was just adorable. I really enjoyed it. If you're not the kind of person that likes a lot of world building or a lot of high stakes fantasy war kind of stuff, this is the perfect fantasy, I think, because there is a love interest and there is a very good storyline, I think, for Emily Wilde as well. And learning about her, she's this like awkward scientist that doesn't really socialize well. So I think she was just very charming and very cute, and I did enjoy this book a lot. I gave this a 4.25 and 0 on spice. I'm so excited to see where that one picks up in the next one. Then I read Denise Mina's Conviction. This was like a funny thriller, I think it was supposed to be intended. It was weird, quirky. There was a podcast element in this as well. This woman ends up listening to a podcast one day and realizes that she knows who the victim is that's being talked about, and she thinks that the story just wasn't told right and that there were lies and all this other stuff, and you find out about things from her past and the people that are involved in this crime, and she starts questioning everything. So she goes on this adventure with this other guy that ends up being a part of her life because of an interesting situation that happens at the beginning of the book. And it's just them kind of being, I want to say like keyboard detectives, but at the same time they're still going out and trying to figure stuff out. There's a lot of cat and mouse in this, and it's just interesting, and it was funny. I don't want to say funny, but it was definitely an entertaining thriller. It was a little bit more lighthearted, although obviously there was tragedy in it, so there is that aspect of it, but did enjoy this more than I thought I would for it being like a find that I got at Ollie's a few months ago. It was interesting. I gave it a 3.25 and half on the spice. I will give something a half spice if there's like any type of spice that goes beyond like kissing, just so everybody's aware. Just because I can't say that there's 0 if something is either implied or talked about enough. All right, the next few books we're gonna rapid fire through because they were all part of a continuing series vlog. The first was The Red Scrolls of Magic by Cassandra Clare. I gave this 3.75 and 1 on spice. Next was Wild Love by Elsie Silver. I freaking loved this book. I gave this a 4 and 2 on spice. Then I read The Stolen Heir by Holly Black, which is the first in the Stolen Heir duology. I enjoyed this much more than the Cruel Prince trilogy, and I gave this 3.75 and half on spice. Then I read Miss Stormy by Tahar Mafi. This is the 4th book in the Shatter Me series. I gave this a 3.75 and half on spice as well. And then finally, I finished that vlog off with Protecting What's Mine by Lucy, which is the 3rd and final book in the Benevolence trilogy. This was my favorite book out of the entire trilogy. I gave this a 4 and a 2.5. I loved this couple so much. All right, and then the next few books were the only other ones that are not part of a vlog. I read Throne of the Fallen by Kerri Maniscalco, which is the first in her Princes of Sin, I believe it's called, series that follows the Kingdom of the Wicked. So this follows Wrath's brother Envy. Wrath is obviously the male love interest in the Kingdom of the Wicked trilogy. And I believe there's going to be one of these books for every other brother. So there should be 6 of these. And I think the next one comes out in September, August or September. And I want to say it follows Gluttony, but I'm not 100% sure. Anyway, this was really fun. There were things in this that surprised me. I enjoyed the love interest. I think it was what I would consider a slow burn. There was a lot of like teasing and like bickering and tension between the 2 main characters throughout the entire book. And I like that it was a slight slow burn. It wasn't necessarily clean at the beginning, but them taking their relationship to the next level, I think, took quite a bit of time in the book. And you're learning about them. They're like both involved in this like game that the fairy king puts on. Basically, he steals something from you at some point in your life, and every so often he does this game where you can win it back, but the stakes are really high, and they're both involved in this. And Envy is using, what was her name? And Envy was using Camilla to try to get his item back, and you find out that Camilla is more directly involved with a lot of things than you'd expect and that Envy was expecting, and along the way they just kind of fall in love, and it's really cute. I really enjoyed it. Again, there were some surprises along the way that kept the book really interesting, and I think that slow burn did help. And Envy definitely, I think that I want to say that the prompt that I had to pick this for was like he falls first and harder. I don't know that he fell first, but he definitely fell harder, and I love a guy that falls harder. So I gave this a 4-star and 2 on Spice. For that being the adult book too, I feel like she kept the Spice pretty clean, even compared to Kingdom of the Wicked, which I think is considered YA or new adult, something like that, but this Prince of Sin series is considered an adult series. Then I read Sarah Driscoll's Lockdown, which was an arc I had on NetGalley that I just had been wanting to read. I think it was already out by the time I read it, but it was still something I had my eye on. And it is essentially about like a school shooting, and the perspective you're getting is the first responders. So you're following basically Gemma and Sean, who they refer to as Logan throughout the book because that's his last name, and he is basically SWAT is the best way to describe him. Like, he deals with high stakes situations. He's not just like your standard police officer. He's the one that goes in and confronts the gunman. And then Gemma is a hostage crisis negotiator, I guess is the best way to describe what she does. And you're seeing them deal with this situation from the first responder point of view, and it is a very sad, very difficult book to read if that's something that would bother you, because Sarah Driscoll does not hold back with her descriptions of what is going on and what has happened and how they find out about the shooters and what their motives are in handling them and everything. It was very dark. It was a very dark read, but a very fascinating read. I hate using that word, but it was. And for something that's occurring way too often in our country, it was definitely hard to get through at times, but I think very well written. I've obviously never been through that kind of a situation, but it seemed very realistic and not just glossing over the difficult parts, and I appreciated that. That was a difficult one to rate. I did end up giving it a 3.75 just because I appreciated her writing and how she told the story. And obviously there's like no spice in that book. Then I read my first Elin Hilderbrand, and I read The Hotel Nantucket. So this book is a romance, contemporary fiction kind of vibe. I'm not sure. It was a little bit of a mystery going on. There was a little bit of a paranormal aspect to it. There was kind of everything in this book. It is something that, like, I think maybe more middle-aged women would enjoy more than I did. I didn't dislike this book. It was fascinating. There were just a lot of characters you were following at times, and it seemed a little chaotic to me, but the story overall was interesting. I'd say our main character, Lisbeth, I enjoyed her part of the story, but I think that there were too many other side characters that got a little bit too much screen time, in my opinion, and it moved a little slow at times because of that. But overall, I enjoyed this. It was about a woman who is like looking for a second lease on life in Nantucket because of something that happened with her, and this like rich British guy buys this hotel that has been like considered haunted, and like nothing's ever survived in it business wise because of a tragedy that happened. They think everyone in the town thinks it's cursed, so this guy buys it to redo it, and he wants to get this like 4th key from this travel blogger essentially, and no one's ever gotten 4 keys from her, so like that's his goal. So Lisbeth is the manager of the hotel and is helping to try to make everything perfect so that they can get this 4th key, and she's also dealing with obviously things that have been happening in her life. So It was interesting. I may read another Ellen Hildebrand. I'm not going to go out right away and buy one, but I did want to try to read one, and I had heard great things about this book. I gave this a 3.5 and 1 spice. And then to quickly finish this out, because this last 4 books that I'm going to talk about were all in my reading new thriller releases vlog that should have just come out a few days ago. The first was Daughter of Mine by Megan Miranda. I gave this a 3.75 and half spice. Then I read Middle of the Night by Riley Sager. Freaking loved this book. I gave this a 4.25 and 0 spice. Then I read Ruth Ware's One Perfect Couple. Not my favorite Ruth Ware, but I still enjoyed this. This was a 3.5 with 0 spice. And then I read The Midnight Feast by Lucy Foley, and I really enjoyed this book as well. This was also a 4.25, and this had half spice. So that is it. That is the 24 books that I read in June, and I'm so excited for the month of July. I have another new release vlog coming out this weekend, so pay attention for that. I will not be picking up another thriller for a while, because when I read so many thrillers in one week, it does kind of get to my head. And these were all kind of exceptionally creepy, those last 4. So I will be taking a break on that. But I have a lot of books I'm looking forward to reading in July. Let me know if you've read any of these books. Let me know if any of these interest you and what your thoughts are on them in the comments below. And if you liked my video, you like my content, don't forget to like and subscribe. And I hope to see you all in the next video.